Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your history lesson today. We're starting a new topic. So we've finished with homes now, and now we're going to be moving on to Grace Darling. Who is Grace Darling? What did she do? Why is she a famous lady? All of these things we are going to find out over the next few weeks. So Grace Darling is a famous lady from the past. I wonder if you will be able to guess what time period she's from. Now, she was born on November the 24th, 1815, and she died on the 20th of October, 1845. Does that give you a little clue? Let's see. Okay, let's move on. So here I've got a timeline of events that are really key that's happened over hundreds and hundreds of years. And Grace Darling, she was born in 1815. And this was in a time period called the Victorian times. Have we been looking at Victorian times recently? We have, haven't we? We've been looking at homes in Victorian times. So she was born in Victorian times. But what can you remember about Victorian homes? Pause the video here and have a chat with the person in the room. Okay, what did you remember? I bet there was loads of things that you could recall. These are a couple of things that I wanted to share with you. So Victorian homes, do you remember, had no electricity. So how they got light was they used candles. Do you remember we talked about that before? So they didn't have light switches and they didn't have lights coming down from the ceiling. They had to use candles to light their homes. Sometimes that could be a little bit dangerous. Do you remember why? That's right. It's because sometimes the candles could cause fires. But the candles were used for light and sometimes often for heat. Now, in Victorian times too, they had no central heating. So no radiators, no gas fires. How did they get warm? What did they do? Can you remember? That's right. They used fires. So they used fires to keep themselves warm. Now, as Grace Darling, she was born in the Victorian period, she wouldn't have had electricity either, nor would she have had central heating. So in her home, she would have had to use candles and fires to keep herself warm. Amazing. Okay. Now, this is a picture of Grace and some of her family. So Grace was actually I think I've just got my notes here. She was the seventh child of nine children. And her father here, he was the lighthouse keeper. So he would look after the lighthouse, make sure and go and light the lamp. And again, back then, they didn't have electricity, so they didn't have a huge, big light bulb. They used to have to light it with oil lamps. Do you remember we spoke about oil lamps before? Brilliant. Okay, so here is Grace with some of her brothers and sisters. Let's have a little look at what they're doing. Now remember, what kind of activities did Victorians used to do? Pause the video here, see if you can remember. Okay, can you remember? Brilliant. They used to read books, they'd play instruments, and Grace's mother here is using a spinning wheel to spin wool. So maybe she might use that for knitting later on, which Grace is doing here, can you see? And her younger sister is rolling out some pastry. Maybe she's going to do some baking, and her brothers are reading there. Now, Grace and her family spent most of their time on the ground floor of their lighthouse, so the bottom floor. Now, the reason why they did this was because that room was heated by the fire. They didn't have fires up on the other floors, so that floor was the one that had the fire. Because it had the big stove, can you see here? And do you remember when we looked at those before in the Victorian homes? So in there was their kitchen and their dining room, as well as their living room. It was all one room together. Now, above that, there was a spiral staircase. And do you remember in the video, oh, sorry, I haven't shown you the video yet. In the video, we're going to see how she goes up and up through the spiral staircase. And a spiral staircase is a staircase that goes round like that. And it went to 3 different bedrooms. But on the very top, what do you think was there? That's right, that's where the light was. So they had bedrooms on these floors and the light was in the top. Brilliant. Now then, I'm going to show you a little video of Grace Darling here, just to give you a little bit of information. So listen now, let's find out.
I'm going to tell you something about my life. My name is Grace Darling. I was born in the year 1815 in Northumberland. I would have had a very ordinary life, were it not for something that happened one stormy night. The story of that night is the story I shall tell. The first thing you should know is that my father was a lighthouse keeper, and when I was growing up, the lighthouse was my home.
Oh, sorry.
It was my father's job to light the lantern at the top of the lighthouse every night, so that sailors out to sea would see it and steer their ships clear of dangerous rocks. Their lives depended on it. Lighthouses were built round and tall so that they could stand up against the storms which would whirl around us rather often. There was just one room on each floor, with a spiral staircase running round the edge from one floor to the next. My bedroom had round walls without corners, and I loved it. When we visited relatives on the mainland, their square rooms never felt quite right. I love the sea. I spent a lot of time looking at it and thinking of the sailors out there somewhere, looking back at the lighthouse. And that's how I grew up, in our little world of round rooms and routines.
There, I'm going to pause it. Okay, so we're going to move on now. This was Grace's lighthouse, and she lived inside, it was called Longstone Lighthouse. And it was quite remote, her lighthouse, and it was built on rock, just about 1 metre. That's about as tall as you are, above the sea, okay? And it was up near the North Sea. Now, do you remember when we were looking at the UK and we looked where the North Sea was? It's right towards the top, the north of the UK. It's near Scotland, the North Sea, and around that coast there of Scotland, okay? Now, it's a very bleak and wild environment. That means there wasn't a lot of things there at all. It was very cold and very windy. And for Grace and her family to get things like food and water, the food, they would have to sail and row their boat to another island to get their food. Their water had to be brought to their little island with their lighthouse on in big barrels of water, although they did also collect rainwater to drink and to wash in too, because there wasn't any running water where they lived. They also had to go across to different islands to get things like eggs and also animals too, if they wanted to keep any animals over there. Now, like we said before, they spent most of their time on the ground floor of their lighthouse. And do you remember could you see as we went up and up and up the spiral staircase? I love those staircases, don't you? Now, let me show you Grace's father. This is him here. And he is called William, okay? And this is her father and this is her mother. And This is a picture of her with her mother and father and one of her brothers, I think it is there. So Grace was a Victorian lady who didn't go to school because where they lived, there was no schools at all. So Grace's father taught all of the children at home. He taught them to read and write and to do arithmetic. And Grace's sisters learnt how to knit and to sew and to cook. And that's what their mother taught them. And all the children in the lighthouse as well were taught how to look after the lighthouse. The other really important thing that Grace's father taught her was geography. Now, geography, remember, is all about the world, and he taught her a lot about that. Very important. Now, I'd like you to think about, what would you like to ask Grace Darling? This is your activity that I want you to think about. I'm going to show you some questions that I have, but you might have some questions too that you would like to ask her. So my questions are, let me just move my picture over to here. Did you enjoy living in the lighthouse? What did you wear? Remember I said it was really cold and bleak up in Northumberland where she lived. What was your favourite hobby? Because you learnt to do so many things. And how did you keep warm? Those are my questions I would like to ask Grace Darling. But what would you like to ask her? What would you like to find out about her? Would you like to know about what subject she enjoyed her father teaching her? What she used to do for playing outside? Did she play outside? Did she play in the sea? What did she like to eat? I'd like you to really think now all the questions you would like to ask Grace Darling. Now on your sheet, you have your picture of Grace Darling, and then all around it you can write your questions. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you're going to write there, Year 1. Now you take care, and I will see you very, very soon.